Hello and welcome to another episode of the Out of Program podcast. Joined today by myself and also Jing, the fellow co-host of the Out of Program podcast. And we've got a very, very special guest with us today. We've got Liz Ashall-Payne, and she is a former speech and language therapist and founding CEO of ORCA, a global leader in digital health accreditation and distribution. For us, getting Liz onto the podcast was a no-brainer, since Liz, after all, was one of the earliest mentors for both me and Jing and helped us get our toes wet when it came to the world of clinical entrepreneurship and business. So thank you again, Liz, for joining us. It's really humbling for you to be here with us as our first guest on the Out of Program podcast. So Liz, we want to get straight into the questions. Your background is in speech and language therapy. And of course, when me and Jing interviewed one another, we talked about own motivations for getting into medicine. So what made you pursue a career in speech and language therapy?
Yeah, so, probably the same as a lot of people when you're at school and around about the time you're doing your GCSE, so around about 15, 16, you get asked the question, what job do you want to do when you grow up? And I was asked that question and I didn't really know what I wanted to do, but I did know what I was interested in. And the big thing for me was I wanted to help people. That was a bit of a passion for me. And so that naturally took me into thinking about health and healthcare. And of course, the two obvious jobs to think about would be a doctor or a nurse. However, I also knew that I was very squeamish and still am. And so I thought, right, what other jobs are there in healthcare which would avoid that squeamish touch point? So I started to look at other roles, and therapists came about. And then I was really fortunate in that I was able to get a placement with a speech and language therapist. And I went and spent a couple of days with different speech and language therapists. And I thought, oh, this looks really interesting. And my school report always said, could do better if spoke less. So I thought that's the career for me. So I pinned my plan on a speech and language therapy degree and went off to university.
Very nice. And I guess during your time, choosing speech and language and studying speech and language, were you looking at, alternative career opportunities? Were you exploring different things, or were you very much head down, become a speech and language therapist and I guess go through the conventional ladder of progression?
Yeah, so I think at the time, so for me, this was scarily about 28 years ago. So it's quite a long time ago now. So when I studied, innovation wasn't even really a word we talked about when it came to health and healthcare, and everything was quite traditional in that you see a patient face to face. Now, what happened for me was as soon as I qualified and got my first role and went and sat in clinic, I felt really frustrated. So day one, I thought, I'm so excited. I'm going to start helping people and helping patients. And at the end of day one, I sat there in my clinic and I thought, well, what was that about? I've only helped patients. What about everybody else? And in the corner of the room was a big filing cabinet, and it was full of patient notes and full of waiting lists of people who needed assessing, reassessing, waiting for therapy. And I thought, we've got to do this differently. We can't carry on doing just single face-to-face, one-on-one appointments. There's only so many speech and language therapists even getting trained. So I was thinking, how can we do things differently? And so I suppose quite early on, I wanted to do things differently, but probably still within the sphere of being a clinician. And I got really interested. At the time, we called it quality improvement. So how do we work differently so that we can speed up work that we're delivering, ultimately to release more time to care? And so I did quite a few different things and managed to support myself and my colleagues so that rather than seeing 6 patients a day, we were now seeing 10 patients a day. And then we looked at different ways of working. So my background and my area of expertise clinically then moved into complex paediatric care. And so I started thinking, well, how can we support parents to be able to provide support and therapy when I'm not there to help that child? So we then started looking at parent groups. Then we did groups of children. Then I'd go into nurseries. And so I started thinking quite differently about how we deploy therapy. And do you know what? it was amazing. And we really rapidly changed access to service by doing things in a more efficient, lean way. But again, very quickly, you can get quite frustrated because you can only run as fast as you can run. So once you're seeing your maximum 10 people a day and you're doing group therapy and you're supporting other people in that child's life, well, how do you do things really different to transform the way in which we deliver care to people? And really, I'd probably been working in the NHS now for about 15 years, and I was fortunate. I was working at board level, and I was also supporting other boards to think about working differently. And it was around about that time when technology started to emerge as a theme for really working differently. And so this was when we saw the rise of electronic health records, laptops, emails, and then the smartphone. Smartphone arrived. I got really excited, because I wouldn't have said that I was a real forward thinker when it came to technology on a personal basis. But everybody was buying the smartphone, and we started to see a small explosion of digital health and health apps. So initially I'm trying to think now, probably around about 2011, 2012, there was about 30,000 health apps. And I thought, right, if we can make sure that these products are safe, everybody's got a smartphone, we just have to put the two things together, and hey, presto, everybody has access to healthcare. And so I suppose that they were some of the early foundational thinking for what was then founded, which is Orca.
No, it's quite interesting. Just thinking about what me and Jing said when we spoke to one another. It's this initial frustration with how limited your scope can be. There's only so many hours in the day. It's you and the patient, and another patient, and another patient. But there's only so many patients you can see before.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I quite often describe it as equal measures of passion and frustration. So you're frustrated because you want to help more people, but because you're passionate about helping people, it really drives you forward. And I think that, if I'm being absolutely honest, in working entrepreneurially in this space, you have to have equal measures of frustration and passion, because one fuels the other. But also it's not easy to make a difference and make a change, because it's quite a challenging environment. It's very complex. And so you need probably both of those ingredients.
Can I ask more about that transition? Because you've talked a bit about some of the foundations that eventually led you to creating Orca, which we'll touch upon in a moment. But prior to that, you went from being a speech and language therapist, and then you started feeling that frustration in your clinical practice. There was the advent of technology. We talked a little bit about your own scalability and your own impact across a patient base. Can you walk us through how you went from speech and language therapist into your first, I suppose, non-clinical roles?
Absolutely. Because it is, I mean, it's quite a big decision actually stepping outside of that professional circle. So for me, it was a slow journey. And it was one that was always about, how can I impact more people's health outcomes? That's always been the question that I've asked myself. So as a clinician, when I first trained, obviously I was seeing patients one-to-one. I then actually started to move into management ultimately. So I then managed speech and language therapy and changed from the systems and processes. And because we did quite a lot of rapid change, I was then asked to help other services. And I loved doing that because I could then help more people. So I then went into school nursing, health visiting, continence nursing, primary care, dental practice. I mean, literally, I have worked in nearly every part of health and care that you can imagine, in community, primary and acute. And my role really was to go in and do some real understanding about what the challenges were in that service, and then work with the team to think about how we could do things differently to benefit more patients. So during that time, I also did my master's in health and in management and leadership in health and social care, but I also continued to work clinically, and that was really important to me. I wanted to maintain that clinical position. So I did that probably for a good 8 years. And I supported the transition when we went through the commission provider split. And then at that point, because we were going through something called Transforming Community Services, which actually is very, very similar to the integrated care boards that we're starting to see now. I was then asked to support other boards and other organisations that were going through this transition and change and really help them think through how they can do things differently to benefit population and patient health. And that's when technology became an enabler, but there's lots of other enablers. So your financial mechanisms, your leadership challenges, patient and public involvement, all the different key things that you need to think about. And I did that work with the King's Fund, actually, or with a think tank, which was amazing, because what I was doing was working with really big strategic leaders and helping boards to turn that into practice and then deliver impact, which is what my passion was all about. And it was during that time in my career, if I'm being honest, where I decided really to ask myself the question, do you want to continue to work clinically or not? Because by this point, I'd probably become a real expert clinically. And then over time, of course, you almost descale and you go backwards. And the question I asked myself was, well, would I ever go back to being a speech and language therapist wholesale? And the question was, no, I wouldn't. And it's scary. And the reason it's scary is because it's such a big part of who you are. And of course, you put a lot of work and effort into achieving that clinical expertise and achieving, that status. So it was quite a difficult decision. And obviously, then contacting my Royal College and saying I'm not going to continue to work professionally is really difficult. But I think what I am always is really transparent. And I felt that I was giving my professional standing maybe some lip service. I was probably only just managing to keep my 30 hours of clinical practice in a year. And I don't do that. If I do something, I'm fairly all in or all out. And so for me, I suppose it was quite an easy decision at that point to say I'm not all in and therefore I'm probably better being all out. And the other thing was I wasn't feeling that I was getting continuity of care with my patients. So predominantly I was going in, assessing and diagnosing them, walking out. And of course, in the world of therapy particularly, you really build a strong relationship. And so I wasn't doing that. Now, at that point, what I also had to do is really have a word with myself to say the work you are now doing with these boards and with these systems is impacting far more people than you would be able to do as an individual clinician. And I think that that's how I feel today with the work we do at Orca. I still have to, that's what drives me. The thing that drives me is having an impact on people and patients' health outcomes. And so after that, I then actually was really fortunate because I was invited to go to one of these organisations that was being set up called Academic Health Science Networks. And so they've obviously been going a long time now. And I was asked if I would lead on digital. And it was the first year of them being in play. And it was amazing because it was like setting up a new business. It was really thinking about the strategy for digital with a focus on impact. But then after a year, I hit my 20 years service within the NHS. And of course, we all think about working in the NHS for 40 years. And so I thought, well, I'm halfway through my career. What do I really want to do in the next half of my career? And it was scary, actually. That was probably scarier than stepping outside of clinical practice, thinking, am I going to step outside of the NHS? And I've got a really supportive family. And my husband said, I think you should give it a go. And so I actually left the NHS, not to set up Orca, but I set up a consultancy company. And I remember walking out of the office after having my leaving lunch and thinking, what am I doing? Seriously, what am I doing? My parents were saying, what are you doing? You've done a really good job in the NHS. What are you doing? And so it was scary. But the reality was I still worked with the NHS. I now just had, a company to a different vehicle to do that. And the other reason I did it was because I wanted to work internationally, because I wanted to learn about, is there a different way of doing this work that we can all benefit from? So that's where I...
It sounded like you had a mid-NHS life crisis.
It was a bit like a midlife crisis, so probably, yeah. I think
that's a good. I think it's a good term. We could come up with mid-NHS life crisis. We can make it a thing. No, one of the cool things hearing about that journey, Liz, is a lot of it resonates with our audience, this identity crisis.
Yeah.
Who am I? And the thing with healthcare as a career, from day one, very early on, like you said, GCSEs, you start gearing up for this persona, the doctor, the dentist, the speech and language therapist, the nurse, the midwife, the physician associate, and you build yourself up to be that person. And then when you start to have these thoughts of, well, I want to be something else, it's kind of like, well, I'm the doctor, I'm the speech and language therapist. What will I be now? What is Liz going to be now?
Yeah.
How did you like deal with that transition? Was it something you came across? Did you get any advice from someone that kind of helped you change your framework or your view of mind?
Possibly. I think it's really interesting, the question that you're asking, because when I start any conversations, even now, all those years later, I quite often start with my clinical background. Okay. It's a little bit like if you think about a stick of rock. I have speech and language therapist. It still is. It's still in me. And I feel really proud of that. And I also reflect on it quite a lot, particularly when, as Orca, when we're developing products, I can still look at something as a clinician and think, how would I use this? It's still very much in there. It's just that I don't practice every day. I think the identity piece is, for me, I don't think I've really ever dealt with that, if I'm honest. And the reason why is because I still know that I am at the core a speech and language therapist. And it's a little bit like when I'm talking to NHS partners, quite often say we, and I'm not saying it for effect. I genuinely say it because I still feel like it's a we. So it's a bit like speech and language therapist. It's like a tree. I've never thought about it. It's like a tree with your circles. So in the centre, I'm a speech therapist. Then, the NHS is still in me. I don't think I ever lost that identity. I think when I left the NHS, that felt like a bigger circle to step of, and probably a scarier circle, not least because, I had bills to pay and I had 2 children, and, the reality of not earning a salary is quite scary, and not having that identity of working for such an amazing organisation such as the NHS. But I think I'm also very pragmatic. And so I'm the kind of person that wakes up in the morning and says, right, what am I going to do today? And get really focused in. And I think so long as you always align your mission to the work that you're delivering, you can really hold on to all those circles in your tree. So, I am 100% passionate about what we do at Orca because I want to help people and I want to help people and patients' health outcomes exactly the same as what it was on day one.
Can I ask you a bit more about your time as an independent consultant? Because I totally resonate with what you're describing, that whilst when you were a speech and language therapist, you then started exploring different responsibilities, which still was within the safety of the NHS. Exactly. But I think the move from the NHS into independent consultancy must have felt like a huge leap. And I suppose one of the recurring themes that we hear about is how clinicians are often risk adverse. So they like to operate within structure. So these things like quality improvement or NHS management feel comfortable. But then to step in the unknown is really daunting. So do you want to talk a bit more about that experience of being an independent consultant?
Yeah, and I have talked to a lot of not just clinicians, but people who are looking to step outside of an NHS circle or a salaried job circle, because it's scary, particularly when you've got bills to pay and children to feed. There is a reality check, and actually that was where I started. So I gave myself a fair run before I actually left. So I had a bit of thinking time whilst I was still in employment. And when I left the NHS, I wasn't working full time. My little boy was very little. And so I was working 3 days a week. And so I had the ability to have some brain space a few days a week on this journey to think about what is it that I'm going to offer potential future clients? What are my superpowers that I can offer to that market, and how would that be structured? So I was really fortunate in that I had some thinking time, and I also had good mentors. And I use the word plural because I've never just had one mentor. I think you need different mentors for different things. And so I was really fortunate in that I had lots of different mentors that were helping me work through some of these things. So what does my day look like? And that was probably one of the best questions that I was asked. Not what job do you want to do, but what does your day look like? And also not just thinking about yourself as somebody who works, but also as a mum, as a wife, as a friend, as a daughter. What does your life look like? And I think that's really important. And the reason I think it's particularly important for clinicians who are thinking about doing something different is because we all, and I am yet to meet a clinician who doesn't feel like this, we all are here for somebody else quite often in our working life. And when you're working within the healthcare system and you're seeing patients, that works really, really well. But when you move into business, I think you have to think really carefully about what does this mean for me and my life? Because otherwise your whole life could become the product of what somebody else wants you to do. And of course, we're naturally akin to thinking through how can I help somebody and how can I help them get where they want to get to. And so we really have to think carefully about what do I want for my life. And that's something that I now say to people that I mentor and coach. One of the first questions I ask them is, if you woke up tomorrow and your life was what you wanted it to look like, what are you doing? Where are you living? Do you have a family? Are you getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning, rushing off to an office? What does your life look like? Because it's so easy to fast forward 10 years and think, oh, I've woke up in this life. And actually, what happened to all the dreams that I had? And so I think that was a really important part of my journey of thinking about stepping outside of the NHS and what do I want to achieve. And so because I had that clarity on mission, but also clarity on vision of what I wanted my life to look like. That was really important. And then the other thing that was really important, and I've said this now 3 times, is the practicalities of paying the bills. So I worked it backwards. Me and my husband sat down and we said, how much money do we need to make a month to stay in our home, to pay for our bills? And then what I did was I tried to make sure that I could find a consistent customer or client that I could work with that would give me that income maybe. So I had a role with an organisation that took me on as a consultant for 2 days solid a week for a year. Now that gave me a comfort blanket, and also the work was really incredible. But then what it also meant was that I knew that I could still feed my family. So I wasn't going to have that pressure on me, which I know, like I say, I've said this 3 times, but it's such an important part of the jigsaw puzzle because it's life. So I think that I was really lucky in that I had mentors talking me through some of the financial situations that you need to think about. What do you want to achieve? What does this mean for you? Having that conversation with my own family, saying, how do you feel about me maybe working a bit more hours? Having that more generic conversation, I think helped me. And then really being clear about what you're offering. So you're not just going out there saying, right, I can offer my services. Well, what's unique about you? What are your superpowers? And what are you actually able to do for a customer?
Well, I think you've hit some really solid points for the audience in the sense, number one, I really like your analogy of the tree, Liz, in the sense that at the core, your main trunk is NHS and your background is speech and language. What you've gone on to achieve with Orca is just branches of that tree. But at the core, the roots are still the NHS. You live and breathe NHS, but you just execute the impact differently. And I think one of the things we're seeing, me and Jing, is this, I think, false belief that you go from 0 to 100 overnight.
Yeah.
It's not.
No.
If you look at your own journey, Liz, it sounds like it was progressive. You went from being a single practitioner to then working in a team, then ascending management, a hierarchy, getting into positions where you can make more large scale, and then naturally being like, I can make this larger through Orca. Yeah. And I think one of the things we want to just emphasize to the audience is and I'm reiterating what you said, you've got to have these frank discussions with people that mean something to you on your journey, because
absolutely,
don't dive head first in, because there may not be any water.
And the other thing I'd say is you might take a diversion and that might not be the right one. You can always go back. Going back is not failing. going back is learning that wasn't right. And actually, I now want to do this. So, you know, a good example was, which I've missed out. I did do private practice as a clinician as well as working in the NHS. And I'm not going to lie, it didn't really work for me. It didn't really suit me. The main reason was because I was having to get in the car and drive a long time. And I just couldn't just keep to the time that was allocated with that patient because it felt, you know, it felt different with the parents paying me personally money. And so, you know, I'd spend 3 hours when I should have spent 30 minutes. I just really struggled with it because it was outside of a structure. You know, you talked about us clinicians needing structure, whereas as a consultant, that suited me far more because it was about having a clear project plan, having clear deadlines, having clear deliverables. And so yes, it wasn't that I wasn't doing it well. It's probably just that I just really struggled with that structure. For me, now for other people, that works really, really well. And so it's just finding and testing and trying these things.
Something I want to explore a bit more with you is you mentioned mentors that helped you along the way. So I'm just wondering if you can share more about, you know, who these mentors were and how they supported you, you know, throughout your journey.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I've always had mentors and coaches. And I suppose one of my secrets is sometimes my mentors and coaches don't know that they're my mentors and coaches. And so what I mean by that is I want to learn from everybody, and everybody's got a superpower and everybody's got something different to offer. And so I try and learn from everybody I have a touch point with. So yeah, if I can give some learning, great. But I ask questions all the time and I'm always curious and I'm like, oh, how did you do that? And how did that work? And if you were in this situation, what would you do? So yes, I've had formal mentors and coaches, but I've also had mentors and coaches that didn't know that they were my mentors and coaches. And of course, when I first founded Orca, you can hear that my background was not in business. What did I know about shareholders, investors? What did I know about even structuring a business, a product-based company? So in the early days, my investors were my mentors. Now, they've never said, and they still continue to be, I'll still ask them questions and learn from them. They've never said, oh, I'll mentor you, Liz. But absolutely, they've been my mentors. And I've come across people who have taught me amazing things by probably putting me through some difficult experiences. Now I think, well, aren't I lucky that I got that learning very quickly? Yes, you can have your formal mentors. The other thing I'd say is don't be scared to ask anybody to be a mentor because most people want to help people. I've never, ever had anybody say no. And I can also say that I've never said no to anybody because I want to help. I want to give back as much as I receive, and I receive a lot.
Well, you've certainly been an amazing
definitely.
mentor to myself and Mohammed in our early years. Certainly when
I was-
we were out. Certainly when I was in the Northwest.
Liz, one question we get a lot about mentors. Everyone goes, oh, I need to find a mentor. I need to find a mentor. One thing that people don't seem to like kind of ask, which I think is a bit of a more important question. I'd love to pick your brains about this. What should you look for in a mentor?
Yeah, so I think you need to be really honest with what do you want to get out of it. So is it learning? Is it personal development? Is it challenge? You know, what is it you need from a mentor at that moment in time? And once you become really clear about what you need, so sometimes I've just needed learning. I've literally just needed to learn about, you know, for example, when we went through quite a big raise in 2021, I'd never put together a very big pitch deck. I'd never gone out to the investor community and actually gone through that process. I'd never looked at waterfalls and shareholding and valuations. So I needed to learn about this stuff. So yes, of course, I read books, but there were certain things that I needed to learn. And so I found people who had that knowledge who were incredible at putting those things together. And I spent time with them and said, look, and then I was really clear with them and said, I need to learn this can you show me how this works, and can I ask you questions about this? Now, in other instances, I need challenge. And so I have said to people, look, can I have some conversations with you? And what I really need from you is some challenge in this area. So, I had that conversation with Pete, our chairman, just last week. I said, what I'd really like to get out of this conversation is I'd like to tell you what the strategy is for the next 12 months, but I'd like you to challenge me. So I think it's less about the person and more about you being clear about what you want and need from the session that you're about to embark on. And it may be that you have a mentorship session once and that's it. And then you've got what you needed from that individual and their superpower. And then you can go, and that sounds really like you're taking all the time, but that's when I think most of us then gift it on. We'll then take it to somebody else and gift on that mentorship.
Well, I think it's just a shift in mindset, because I think most healthcare professionals, when they have a mentor, it's being very quiet, listening, saying yes, okay, thank you. But what you're saying is it should be a conversation. Like, just be honest, open, be like, okay, I am here to learn from you. I need to know this, I need to know that. And then reciprocate when you can to someone who potentially comes up to you. Well, that's really good. That's solid advice.
Then moving on in terms of your career journey, you were that independent consultant, and then of course you went on to found Orca. So can you walk us through what those critical moments were? Like, what made you make that leap to start the business?
Yeah, cool. So I was very happy with my independent consultancy. I had 5 or 6 associates. We were doing lots of work across Europe, North America, and across the UK at national, regional, organisational level. And it was really good fun, actually, if I'm being honest. And I also had a relatively good work-life balance. Really important. Anyway, because I already shared with you that my little boy was very little. My other little boy was only 9 or 10. So anyway, then what happened was, as I was working with different systems and seeing the opportunity that digital presented, I was there to try and support those system leaders to think about how they could work differently to engage with these innovations, more often with the measure of impacting population health or patient health outcomes, but quite often also about simulating the economy. So how can you support these companies to grow so that more jobs are generated, so that more people are in work, so that less people are out of work? And we know that health and wealth has a real direct correlation. I started, again, coming back to that equal measures of frustration and passion. So I was really passionate about this, and when I say this being great innovations out there that can really benefit people and patients, but also really frustrated because the system didn't have a mechanism for receiving and trusting these technologies, buying them and deploying them. And I honestly thought that this problem must have been solved somewhere else. So, of course, you go to North America and you go, somebody solved it here. No, nobody solved it, but they're experiencing the same problems across Europe. No, nobody solved it. Same problems. So I was getting more and more frustrated and equally more and more passionate about the opportunity. So I then started thinking, well, look, this is all about distributing safe stuff. So where else do we distribute safe stuff in healthcare? And the obvious thing to think about is drugs. So medication. So we're very good at distributing drugs to patients via prescriptions, but also over the counter. We have very clear risk thresholds. So, your controlled drugs versus what you can prescribe. So I thought, well, we've got a really clear infrastructure there for distributing drugs. And that starts with checking that the drug is safe. It sounds so simple, but this is where my thinking came from. Checking that the drug is safe. Then making sure that you've got a workforce that knows about these drugs. You wouldn't just have anybody starting prescribing drugs. Start thinking about this in relation to digital health. The third thing is we then have the BNF, so the British National Formulary, where you can check contraindications. We then have the prescription infrastructure, which means we can track and govern what drugs have gone to whom. And of course, we have a reimbursement system, which of course we pay for the prescription, but the drugs are reimbursed. And then we measure impact. So for me, I was like, well, why have we not got that for digital health? And by the way, by now there was about 120,000 digital health technologies, and there's only 30,000 drugs. So I was like, right, at this point, we've got significantly more digital health technologies, Nobody's checking them. Nobody's training. Nobody's creating the ability to find and prescribe them. And what about payment? So for me, it just felt like a bit of an obvious gap. And it didn't feel like rocket science. And also, I just thought, well, somebody should do this. Somebody should build this and get it sorted. So I then spoke to a lot of people and said, why don't you do this? This would be really good for digital health. I went to big organisations like NICE and said, why don't you do this? This could really work. And at the time, nationally, we had the National Information Board. Went to see them. Why don't you do this? This could really work. But of course, this was probably a little bit too soon for the market. Anyway, I then was asked by a supplier, somebody who had a health app, to go and meet with them. And they said, could you help get my product into the NHS as a consultant? And I said, well, I could try. But the problem is that you've got the system won't trust you. They won't know how to deploy you. The teams won't, so I'm really honest. I said, I'm not sure. And he said, well, what would you do about it? And so I told him this analogy with the prescription of drugs. And he said, oh, I think I know some investors who'd invest in that idea. I did not turn up for that conversation. And he said, well, why don't you write a business plan and send it to me and I'll put it in front of some investors. So I did, because I am an activist. And I just thought, well, it's in my head. Probably need to get it out anyway. Yeah. So I wrote this business plan, which I actually now actively share with people I mentor and coach. Because it's probably one of the best things I ever did. I'm writing down what the opportunity is, how you're going to get it to market, what the product is. So I wrote this business plan and sent it to this guy, no NDA, because truthfully, I just wanted the problem to be solved. It wasn't me thinking about getting money in to build a business. But then the following week, I had a phone call, and I think Jing knows this already. Mohammed, you might also know, but a voice said, is that Liz? And I said, yes. And he said, oh, I've had your business plan sent to me. It's Sir Terry Lee here. And I said, oh, right, okay. So I wasn't expecting to get a phone call from Mr. Tesco's himself. But then we had a Dragon's Den style conversation, and I'm not going to lie, it was really scary because his language was very different to my language. The words that he used felt outside of my comfort zone. And anyway, at the end of this 30-minute conversation, he said, thank you. I had no idea what he thought. And anyway, the next week I got an email to say that he and Bill Curry would give me seed fund investments for my idea. And I thought, well, I'm going to have to give this a go, aren't I? And so that was honestly the start of Orca. It was an idea. The only thing on paper was a business plan. And it was very serendipitous, ultimately.
You make it sound so easy to raise that seed funding. You know, when I speak
Mr. Tesco rings you, just like, hello.
No, it's like a fairy tale. And don't worry, Jing, I have paid my dues on further rounds since that point.
Oh, yes. So many clinician entrepreneurs in particular struggle with the fundraise, and it sounds like it just landed on your lap.
Because, most investors don't want to, I took £100,000 investment. Most investors don't want to invest those small numbers, which I'm not saying big, but, to an investor, it's very small. So, what I did, I continued, it's a bit like this tree again. So I continued to work as a consultant because I still had bills to pay, and Orca, I couldn't afford to employ myself. And so I didn't employ myself. I did that work on the days when I wasn't doing my core consultancy, because again, you've got to get back down to practicalities. And if I think about my career, just reflecting actually this back, it's almost been like a wedge of cheese every time I've changed. So it's like I've dipped my toe in to something new, and then over time it's increased. The new has increased and the old has decreased. So I've never done a straight, quick transition from this to that. So what I did do though with Orca was I then worked as a consultant fairly wholesale for the first 12 months. But what I was realising was that every morning I wanted to work on Orca. And again, I'm an all or nothing person. I don't do lip service. And so I felt that it wasn't reasonable to continue to provide services when actually my heart was somewhere else. And so I probably took a faster leap working wholesale for Orca, because that's where my passion was. So I think it's just going back to that question of what's going to make you happy? What do you want to do in your day-to-day life as well?
One thing I was going to ask this, when you talked about your transition from speech and language therapy to Orca, it was that defining moment where you went, okay, I can do something large at scale. What was that point for you when it came to going all in to Orca?
I mean, you can probably hear that it took me a long time. So from being clinical to then getting interested in service design within the speech and language therapy team, then doing that job over and over again in different services, maybe 2 or 3 days a week, working clinically 2 or 3 days a week, then moving into board level, still keeping my hand in, then working into the system level, then working in innovation. So you can see how, and I'm describing, nearly a 30-year career journey here. It like you said, it's not, and I've still got lots to learn, by the way. So I've still got a load more stuff that I need to learn over the next chunk of my career journey. So I don't really believe that there was a one defining moment. And I also recognise that when I tell my story, it sounds very connected and very considered. It probably wasn't. I think that there was some principles that I held on to, which was impact, patience, mission-driven, and a clear focus on what me and my family needed practically. So there were some principles that I took on board at every step, but I wouldn't say that there was one defining moment. Yeah, please, you can hear that if ever I do something different, it's not going to be, you can hear that those principles are so strong from a value perspective. It's going to be, it's going to
still...
like
your North Stars. They kind of drive you into anything.
Yes.
Do you think your background, do you bring the background as a speech and language therapist into your role as CEO of Orca?
100%. 100%. I mean, I feel really fortunate. The degree itself is in communication. So how do you communicate and how do you help somebody else communicate? And also my clinical background was complex pediatric care. So how do you simplify this so a child who's got special needs and understand what you're saying to them? Now, one of the things that I try and do with Orca is it's quite a complex infrastructure that we've built, and there are a lot of complexities. There's, legal, ethical, regulated, distribute, the whole thing is quite complicated. But I think that one of my skills is helping people to understand what it is we're trying to do. And when I first started Orca, my baseline of knowing whether I'd got that right was my parents. So I used to go around to my parents' house and say, let me talk to you for 2 minutes. I was basically doing my elevator pitch, and I'm going to talk to you for 2 minutes, and I want you to tell me whether you understood anything that I've said. And I can tell you now, I got it wrong hundreds of times, and eventually refined that elevator pitch, because I thought if my parents, who are at the time, they're now in their 80s, in their 70s, can understand, when they didn't use technology, if they can understand what I'm talking about, then I've got it right. So I think, yes, the communication piece, just being clinical and understanding what some of those challenges are on a day-to-day basis, and actually having experienced it. But I also bring myself as a person or a patient. I live with a long-term condition, type 1 diabetes. I use technology every day to stay alive. So I think you bring the whole of yourself. And again, these are other circles in your tree. But I also think I bring the fact that I'm a daughter to older parents, the fact that I'm a mum to, boys. I think that you bring the whole of yourself and all your experiences. And I think the key is just reflecting and learning.
So in terms of your journey now into Orca, you've gone all in. You're all CEO of Orca, and you've got the seed funding, Liz. What were the main challenges along that journey? Because you came in, obviously you've got your background experience as a speech and language therapist, running an independent consultancy firm. You had a lot of strings to your bow. But along that journey, what did you find were some of the biggest challenges that could give like an insight to our audience about what they could potentially face?
Yeah, of course. So there's so many challenges and so many lessons learned. And, I could just touch about some of the challenges we're experiencing at the moment. But one of the first ones that you have is you can't do everything. So I know it sounds really simple, but sometimes I've mentored clinicians and doctors who've said, do I now need to go on a coding course and learn how to code? And my answer to that question is no. Find somebody who's brilliant, who's got similar values to you. So your first challenge is you can't be great at everything. But of course, when you first develop a company, you have to be okay at most things because there isn't anybody else there. So how do you do that? Well, the way I did it was I was really honest with myself about what I was really, really not good at. And then find somebody who can help me with that. One of the first things was, of course, what Orca does include some considerations from a legal perspective. I'm not a lawyer, and I wouldn't say that I've definitely learned a lot over the last 10 years. But I needed a lawyer. And actually, so I was really clear. I wanted somebody who had a legal background, but I actually also wanted somebody at the time who had a commercial background because I didn't. I know I'd had my own consultancy company, but it's very different once you get shareholders and boards. And I also wanted somebody who was really passionate about health, who had a similar value base to me. So again, I was really clear on what I wanted to get. And then what I did was I went out to my network and said, do you know anybody who sounds like this? And a name kept coming up, and that name was Tim Andrews, and I'd never met him. And then I suppose Serendipity had another role to play here because I went to a conference in Salford, Media City, and got in the lift, and the man stood in the lift, had his name badge on, and it said Tim Andrews. And I said, are you a lawyer by background? And he said, yes. And I said, well, I need to talk to you. So, he's now my co-founder and came in, and that's how I found him. So I think for me, one of my biggest lessons learned is about being really honest with yourself, about saying, what are you good at and what you're not good at and what do you need? So what me and Tim then did was we then said, okay, well, what are our gaps? And that's how we built the team out from day one. I think the other thing that we always try and do is focus on the problem. So what is the problem we're trying to solve rather than getting wedded to our solution? Because I absolutely love our product. Of course I do. But if it's not solving the problem we were founded on, then we need to revisit the product. So I think being obsessed with the product has been something else. And then I could talk all day about problems, but one of the biggest problems and anybody out there in business will know is cash flow. And cash flow is really, really, really difficult because quite often you're either investing ahead of a curve. And of course, the market, 4 or 5 years ago was very much invest ahead of the curve. Valuations were crazy. People were throwing money out there. And so you build these big teams. And then, of course, nobody bothered to tell the market that the investor community were expecting this massive growth, and it didn't happen. And so the cash flow situation, if you don't realise the cash come in to keep yourself sustainable, it's really difficult. And of course, what we also know in health is that it's not the same as other markets. So quite often it's a feast or famine situation. So you might get a chunk of revenue and then you might not get anything because the cycle of buying has moved into a different position. And cash flow, it's really challenging. People talk about it, but the practical realities are that you're then continuously having to think about that, which then takes you away from actually what you want to do, which is help more people. And so it's this dichotomy really, but you have to do that because if you're not sustainable, then you can't help anybody. So I think that is also something that I don't think I was aware of early days, because when you start, you maybe don't employ anybody. Obviously, I was still working independently and earning my salary. They're a different mechanism, but it's something that really you need to think about. I can carry on with other lessons learned.
No. This is a golden nuggets, and I think two that really resonated with me. One is cash is king. Whether you're bootstrapping, VC funded, whatever, cash is king. And the second thing, I think this really hits home with a lot of this current, kind of frustration with the NHS and people on LinkedIn saying, I'm now looking to transition into another industry. And you mentioned this a few times, Liz, is what is your superpower?
Yeah.
Because let's say me and Jing, We both have MB, CHB, MBBS. You had your speech and language qualification. So will other people. So what will make you an attractive individual for another industry? It's not your medical degree, your healthcare degree may get your foot in the door, but something else has to kind of throw that door ajar so you can get all the way in. I think that's really important for those listening in, is like, try and identify, are you a great communicator? Are you a great salesman? Are you a great tinkerer? Can you build things? But don't just be like, oh, I'm a dentist.
Well,
I'm a
and I think just on that, I'd also recommend ask other people, what do you think is my superpower? Because quite often we don't see it in ourselves. You need some honest feedback. Now, it's quite hard asking for feedback because, one, we're all British, so we're all like, ooh, not sure about getting feedback. But actually, get some feedback. What am I good at and what am I really not good at? The team all the time. So I'll say, right, next time we have a one-to-one, I want you to give me some constructive criticism. What am I not doing well at? I really want to know, because that's how I'm going to learn. We can't all be good at everything. So I'm not good at writing documents. I'm just not. I get bored and I couldn't put a financial model together. I want the data and I want to see it, but I can't put it together. I've not got the attention span. That doesn't mean that I'm terrible. That just means I'm not good at that. But guess what? Somebody in the team is incredible at that. So brilliant. And I'll probably be good at something that they're not good at. And that's actually the way me and Tim work quite often. So quite often he does that out of, I suppose, customer facing, outward facing bits that he would hate to do. Now, I actually think he's better at that than he thinks but he doesn't feel comfortable, so it's not his superpower. So I think ask other people as well as reflecting on yourself.
So we're coming to the end of our time now, so we only have a last one or two questions. I suppose from me, what's next for you, Liz?
So, I mean, our mission is always, for Orca, I've still got so much to do. And I know we've been on this journey for nearly 10 years, but I've got so much more that I want to do. And it feels as though healthcare systems globally are probably ready for what we do now. And we've had some incredible experience and learning on the journey. And I think we're ready to help them. And when I first wrote that business plan for Orca, it was a global offering. And I feel like I'm only scratching the surface, but I'm hoping to accelerate our offering. And me and Tim quite often reflect and say, well, how will we know we've been successful? And the answer to that is when we've been able to help countries, third world countries ultimately, that will be our measure of success. And, for my investors, what that means is serious sustainability so that we can do that. So it's not disconnected to the board's vision. And for me, I want to try and support the market to engage in this new world and this new opportunity in a safe way, which means that everybody can benefit from the and ultimately achieve sustainable healthcare for everybody is what I want to do. And I'm really fortunate. I do wear a few other hats, and I want to continue to wear those other hats. And so, my work at Tech UK is something I'm really passionate about. That's about supporting the economy. I have a 19-year-old son. I'd like him to stay in this country and have a job. In order to do that, our future workforce will be in technology companies, probably. So I want to help that part of the equation as well. And then I also want to really carry on with my international working as well. So I obviously with Orca, I get the opportunity to work internationally, but doing more of that I think is really important because I'm all about shared learning from one country to the other. And then beyond that, I haven't got, until I've achieved that, I can't think beyond that.
That's already plenty. And, you say that you've done this for 10 years and you're just getting started. I think that's typical of health techs. At Patchwork, we've been going for 8.5 years. And I would say we're only right at the beginning of that J-curve,
That because I think, something Mohammed said is that people see that it's you're there, and actually you and I know, Jing, that we still got that big mountain to climb. And actually just one of the other lessons is resilience. You need a way of building your own resilience because this is hard. It's hard on a personal level. It's hard on a professional level. It's the most amazing privilege journey, but it's not easy. So having your own ability to build your own resilience, it's really important.
No, I think it's a reflection of you as a founder as well, Liz, in the sense that you're not done because you have so much passion that you'll find things to do with Orca, things you haven't thought of, things now that are open to you. And I don't think you ever will be done with it. I think you'll be like, I just want to keep going. I find it so fun.
In the gaps.
Exactly.
Well, I mean, the only thing I'd say, Mohammed, is that at some point I might not be the right person to do that job. Now, at the minute, I believe that my skill set allows me to do it. But also, for me, the vision's more important than me. I'm okay with that. And when that comes to that, I'll still be the biggest cheerleader. I'll always be a founder. So I want, for me, it's about being honest. What is it you want to achieve? And I can't remember there's a book or paper that I read, and it's called something like King or Cash. I don't know if you've read it, but basically you have to decide, do you want to be the king? And cash basically means success of the mission, or do you want it to achieve? I want Orca, to achieve what it was set up to achieve. I'm not bothered about being the king or the queen. So if I'm not the right person, I've always said to my board, if you don't think I'm the right person, honestly, let's have that conversation, because I might not see that, but I'll be okay with that. But I don't know.
No, you'll be both. You'll be both. Fingers crossed, both. So one thing I want to ask you, Liz, say I'm your new mentee. I've come to you.
Yeah.
I'm like, Liz, what top or number one or number two practical advice would you give to someone coming to you for the first time, thinking about either following your own path or making that transition out of a standard traditional healthcare career? Would you impart on them?
My number one question is always exactly the same. If you woke up tomorrow and you've achieved success, what does your life look like? And that's really important, because I've had conversations with clinicians who come and said, I want to be an entrepreneur, I want to have a product. And then I ask them that question, and what they actually describe. This person, I'm giving you an actual example here. This person was a single individual, got married, didn't have children, lived in this country. The vision that they talked about was living in a different country with a family, working in an academic institute and having a very relaxed morning, getting into work, finishing at a reasonable time, going for a walk in the evening. That is not the life of an entrepreneur. So immediately what you can say to that person is, that's great, you've got that vision. Let's help you get that life. And don't think you have to develop a product and you have to create a business. Think about what life you want. That's much more important, because otherwise every step forward that you take yourself away from the life you want, and you need to have the two things aligned. So if you want to get up at, Jing, you can describe your day, getting up at 5 o'clock, answering emails in the middle of the night, it's a different life. And if it's not aligned with what you want for your life, then you'll grate and you'll get frustrated and resentful, and that resilience will be really hard to keep. So that's the question to ask yourself. What do you want your life to look like? And then every step you take forward, work towards that picture.
So thank you so much, Liz, for your time. For those of you that have listened in, this is what me and Jing got all those years ago. This words of wisdom, you got it for free today, okay? So you better be grateful. Thank you again, Liz. It's been phenomenal to catch up with you. So inspiring to hear your story. We've got some tidbits that we're going to trademark about the tree, about what is your life. We're going to trademark that as Outer Program.
I hadn't thought before we were talking.
Wow, that was on the fly.
You told me to, as I was talking to myself, no, it is. It's like the rings of a tree, and then like you say, the branches, and then the roots. I think it's a great analogy.
Yeah, you can't get this in any book, all right? Well, coming soon, probably Liz's autobiography. But thank you again, Liz. For those of you joining us on YouTube, please like, subscribe, hit the notification bell. If you're listening to us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, whatever podcast platform you use, please subscribe. Leave any comments. If you have any ideas for any guests you'd like on our platform, please let us know, and we'll see you on the next episode. Thank you for listening, everyone.